Polly, written and illustrated and read by W.J. Walton. One evening, when the sky was bright and the water was warm, a tiny creature pushed and hatched from a tiny egg. Her name was Polly. The very first thing that Polly felt was the movement of the water as it gently rocked her to and fro. She wiggled her legs back and forth and soon discovered that doing this helped her move through the water. This was the very first thing that she learned. The water was much stronger than her legs, however, and it carried her back and forth many times before she landed gently on a pile of bright, shiny eggs. They were eggs that were just like the one she had just hatched from. Polly looked inside and saw a tiny creature just like herself inside of each of them. As she watched, one of the tiny creatures kicked and hatched from his tiny egg. "Hello," said Polly, but the water carried him away before he could answer. Polly watched as more of the tiny eggs hatched, and tiny creatures like herself swam out of them and were carried about by the waves. In a moment, the waves carried her away as well and washed her onto the shore. And that is where she saw the most incredible thing she had seen so far. A dark sky filled with beautiful shining lights. "What are all those beautiful lights?" she asked the others as they drifted by her, but none of them knew the answer to her question. Polly admired the lights until the sky slowly grew bright, the lights faded, and a much bigger, brighter light rose in the sky. Polly was amazed. She had to know more, but before she could watch for much longer, the tide swept her and the others from the shore and out into the deep sea. There were lots of wonderful things to see and discover in her new home, but Polly couldn't stop thinking about the lights above. She asked some of the other creatures about them, but few of them knew very much, and all of them warned her about trying to see them again. "You're too small," Peg warned as she tapped on Polly's shell. "You'll get eaten too easily. Besides, you belong down here." But Polly could not resist. Whenever she had the chance, she would swim to the surface to have a look at the lights in the sky. She never stayed long, for fear that she might get eaten. Sometimes she would stretch some of her legs into the air to see if she could reach them. Time passed, and as she grew, she shed her old tan shell for a new one that was green. Now she was large enough to take longer trips to the surface to see the lights in the sky. She even became brave enough to crawl up onto the sand and view the lights from there. And one day, as she was doing this, she discovered something else that was incredible. There were strange creatures all over the sand. They were tall and walked on only 2 legs, and didn't appear to have any fins or gills or shells. Their claws looked very strange, but they seemed to be able to do lots of things with them. "What are they?" she wondered aloud. She thought she was alone, but Ella and Squeak had just landed next to her and thought she was talking to them. "They're the 2 feet no wings," said Ella. "Squeak!" squeaked Squeak. "Where did they come from?" asked Polly. "Somewhere else," said Ella. "They like to come here when the sky is bright and the air is warm." "Squeak!" squeaked Squeak. Polly wanted to watch longer, but she knew that she couldn't stay out of the water for long when it was warm, so she crawled back into the water, eager to tell the others about her discovery. The others already knew about them, however. "The 2 feet? Stay away from them," said Brock. "They are wild and unpredictable. You never know what one will do to you once they catch you." "They didn't seem so bad," said Polly. "They used to do terrible things to your kind," said Brock. "They would smash your shells or leave you out of the water to dry out, and no one has ever understood why. If you're smart, you'll stay away from them, Polly." Polly wanted to be smart, but she also wanted to learn more about the 2 feet, so she snuck away every chance that she could to observe them some more. She saw some that made fascinating sounds, and some that were very quiet, some that were very active, and some that were quite still. She learned everything that she could by watching the ways that the 2 feet behaved. She even learned a little bit about what they liked to eat. And by watching them carefully, Polly learned that when the air grew cold, the 2 feet didn't visit the shore as often. But when the air grew warm again, they always came back. As time went on and the days of warm and cold took their turns, Polly grew even more, and her new shell was darker, but she never lost her interest in the 2 feet. One warm day, as she was watching the 2 feet on the beach, she was caught by surprise. A pair of them seemed to notice her and walked over to her for a closer look. Polly was scared and nervous and excited all at the same time. She wasn't sure what the 2 feet were going to do to her, so she sat as still as she could. As they got closer, Polly noticed that one of the 2 feet was much smaller than the other. She guessed that it may have hatched not long ago. "What is it, Mamma?" the small one said to the large one. "Just leave it alone. It might be dangerous," replied the large one. "Sure is ugly," said the small one, and both of them walked away. Polly understood most of what the 2 feet had said, but she didn't know what an ugly was. She asked Larry, who had just strolled up next to her. "A 2 feet called me that when I stole some of their food," Larry said. "I think it means someone who is really good at stealing food." Polly hadn't stolen anyone's food, so she was pretty sure that wasn't it. So she asked some of the other creatures in the sea. Dell didn't know and couldn't stop laughing about how silly the 2 feet look when they swim. And all that Aang wanted to do was tell silly jokes. "What did one ocean say to the other ocean?" "I don't know," said Polly. "I was just wondering if you knew anything about—" "Nothing. They just waved. Huh? Good one, right?" "Yes," said Polly. I'm sorry, but I really have to go." Finally, she asked Peg, who didn't know the answer, but knew where to find it. "The only way to find out is to ask one of the great wise ones." "Who are they?" asked Polly. Peg told Polly that the great wise ones were the oldest and wisest creatures in the sea, and that they knew everything that there is to know. "Only the wisest of all get to be a great wise one, and they live in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean." Polly tried very hard to pay attention to the rest of what Peg was telling her, but she couldn't help wondering what the great wise ones were like. Were they scary? Were they kind? How far would she have to go to see one? Would it be dangerous? "Are you paying attention?" shouted Peg, who was tapping angrily on Polly's shell. "I said you're going to have to take them an offering." "What kind of an offering?" asked Polly. "Something rare and precious. The great wise ones don't share their knowledge without an offering." Polly thanked Peg for her help and swam off to find something to give as an offering. After a bit of searching, she found the perfect thing, a shiny shard worn smooth by the sand. It was as blue as the sky when the great light was shining, and Polly knew from her observations that it came from the 2 feet. So she caught it up in her claws, tucked it snugly under her shell, and swam off in search of one of the great wise ones. She swam and swam, deeper and deeper into the darkest part of the ocean, with the precious piece clutched tightly under her shell. Many times she thought she had reached the very bottom of the ocean floor, but found that she could go even deeper. After a long time, she came to a place where the water grew darker than she had ever seen it before, and shadowy shapes shifted all around her. Her legs and gills were very tired, and she hoped that she was nearly there. It was then that she heard a voice, deep and loud but friendly sounding, call out to her. "Come forward, ancient and unchanging one," it said. Polly could barely see through the shadowy shapes, but she could sense that there was nothing to be afraid of, so she swam forward. As she did, she looked all around, hoping to catch a glimpse of the great wise one. "Why did you call me that?" she asked. "Because your kind has remained unchanged for longer than any other citizen of the sea," said the great wise one, "and that includes myself." As he spoke, Polly began to see brief glimpses of him through the shadowy water. He was so large that she couldn't see all of him at once, but she could tell that he had very large eyes and lots of legs. "What brings you to my part of the water, Ancient One?" "I have a question for you, and I was told that you were the only one who would know the answer." "Is that so? Well, I suppose we will see about that. What is your question, Ancient One?" Polly wasn't sure how to put it, so she decided to tell him the whole story. "I've been watching the 2 feet a lot lately because, well, I'm just very curious about them, and one day I heard one of them say that I was an ugly. Can you tell me what an ugly is?" The great wise one was quiet for a moment, and Polly imagined that he was thinking about her question. Finally he spoke. "Ugly. Not sure I know that word. One of the 2 feet used it, you say?" "Yes," said Polly. "No, I'm sorry. I don't know what that word means. We don't use that word here in the ocean." Polly was very disappointed. "But I thought the great wise ones knew everything there is to know. That's what Peg told me, anyway." "Oh, no. On the contrary," he replied. "The first step to becoming a wise one is knowing you do not know everything." Polly wasn't very happy with not having her question answered, and the great wise one could sense it. "Sometimes we have to accept that some of our questions will never be answered," he said. "Do you have any other questions for me, perhaps?" Polly started to say that she didn't, and then realized that she did. "I'm very curious about the 2 feet, and I want to learn all that I can about them, but the others tell me that this is dangerous and wrong. Are they right?" "Ah, you are a curious one," he told her. "You must be, or you wouldn't be here, would you? I'm sure that you know the answer to this question already, but there are times when we need to hear it from others before we believe it. There is nothing wrong with learning about those things that fascinate you, and what you learn may even help you and others in ways that you never thought of. In fact, the 2 feet themselves do it all the time." "They do?" Polly asked. "Of course. The 2 feet are very curious creatures. They're always exploring our home and examining things that they find there. They must still have much to learn because they frequently come back to learn more. They've even been trying to find me for ages, but I'm very good at hiding. So to you, ancient and unchanging one, I say carry on with your curiosity for as long as it makes you happy." That made Polly feel a lot better. The great wise one was right. Learning was a good thing. She already knew this, but had been hoping to hear it from someone else. "If it's all right, may I ask another question?" she said quietly. She wasn't sure how many questions she was allowed to ask. "Oh, please do," said the great wise one. "It's about the lights in the sky. When the great light is gone, you can see so many smaller lights in the dark. What are they?" The great wise one's voice grew hushed and excited. "I am so glad that you asked. That is a subject that I have been studying for a very long time now. I'm not certain yet, but if my ideas are correct, those smaller lights are really many more great lights like our own, but much, much further away." Polly thought about this for a moment, and all sorts of wonderings began to swarm in her brain. "Does that mean that there are others of my kind there, and yours, and 2 feet too?" "Perhaps, but I cannot be certain, and I will probably never know for sure," he said a little sadly, "and I must accept that it's a question that will never have an answer." Polly understood perfectly. "Ancient One, there is one thing that you must remember, no matter what. Every one of us has a responsibility to our kind, and it is very important that we see to it. It is good to learn all that you can about the things that interest you and find happiness in that way, but you must never forget to take the time to fulfill your responsibility." "My responsibility? What do I have to do?" asked Polly. "You will understand, Ancient One, when the time is right." Polly wanted to inquire more, but didn't want to be a nuisance. "Thank you for your time, great wise one," she said. "I really should go now." She started to swim away, but then stopped. "Oh, I almost forgot your offering." "Offering?" he asked. "Peg told me that I had to give you an offering in return for your knowledge." She pulled the precious piece out from under her shell and held it out in one of her little claws. "Great wise ones do not require offerings in return for our knowledge. It wouldn't be right. But I can see that you chose this with great care and carried it safely for such a great distance. I will keep it as a reminder of your visit." Polly told the great wise one goodbye, but not before she promised him that she would return on another day to share with him some of what she had learned. Time passed, and Polly grew older, but she never stopped exploring and learning. Her travels took her from one end of the oceans to the other. She learned everything that she could about everything that she saw, but her favorite subject of all was always the 2 feet. And she made frequent visits to her friend, the great wise one, to share the things that she had learned. Sometimes she even taught him something. As the seasons went by, Polly grew even older. Her shell collected scuffs and cracks from her many adventures, and other creatures began to make their own homes on it. She knew that it would not be long before she could no longer explore the way that she used to, so she took one last trip above the waves to look at the lights one final time. Once she left the water, she noticed a group of other creatures of her kind crawling around on the sand in wide loops and circles. Instantly, she remembered what the great wise one had said about her responsibility to her kind, and now she knew what it meant and what she had to do. She crawled out onto the sand with the others, found a spot that seemed to be right, and began to dig a hole. Once it was deep enough, she positioned herself over it and laid her eggs. Another one of her kind, a male, was clinging tightly to the back of Polly's shell, and as she dragged him over the eggs, he fertilized them, because this was his responsibility. When both of them were finished, Polly looked down into the hole at the eggs she had laid, and saw that they shone just like the lights in the sky. Then Polly crawled back to the ocean, taking one last look at the lights before the waves covered her. One evening, when the sky was bright and the water was warm, a tiny creature kicked and hatched from a tiny egg. His name was Carl. Carl was very curious and inquisitive. As he grew, he discovered many things that he wanted to learn more about, and he was always exploring, sometimes in places where he was not welcome. He constantly asked questions, and questions about the answers to the questions, and questions about those answers as well. He wanted to know why water fell from the sky sometimes, and what the strange creatures on the beach were called, and why Molly lived in such a small house, and if she ever felt cramped in there, and a whole lot of other things. The other creatures of the sea became so annoyed with his constant questions that they sent him away to the great wise ones. "Go down to the deepest, darkest part of the ocean and pester them with your questions," they said. So without hesitation, Carl swam for days and days to the deepest, darkest part of the ocean in search of one of the great wise ones. After a long and tiring journey with weary legs and gills, Carl finally found the home of one of the great wise ones in a small cave in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean. He was so eager to have his questions answered that he didn't even introduce himself. "Great wise one, I have so many questions for you, but the first one I'd like you to answer is this. What are those strange two-footed creatures that walk around on the sand?" And Polly said, "Oh, I am so glad that you asked.